Okay, we're going to build, or this video is going to be on engine disassembly, specifically on the cylinder heads is what we're going to be focusing on. CJ and I are going to both be working on two different engines. We're going to be working on an air-cooled Volkswagen engine. We're also going to be working on a small Chevy Spark engine, which is very similar to what most of you will see in the industry. So we'll just kind of give you a couple of options on what to look for, what to do, how to take it apart, and we'll go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you around the engine, just kind of show you all the different bits and pieces, and then we'll start disassembly. Okay, this is the Chevy Spark engine, and I just wanted to walk you around. For those of you who have been around automotive for quite a while, you're probably familiar with a lot of this stuff, but I'm just going to go ahead and point it out anyway. This right here is the crankshaft pulley, or otherwise known as the harmonic balancer. One of the things I wanted to show you on this is, see this little line right here? This is a rubber coupling, and so the way this works is as the engine goes around, every time a cylinder pulses, it creates a kind of a jarring action with the crankshaft, a pulsing action with the crankshaft. This rubber allows the ring around the outside to absorb some of that. That's why it's called a crankshaft dampener a lot of times. The rubber around here can go bad occasionally and cause the engine to knock, but anyway, that's a crankshaft pulley. This right here is going to be the water pump on this engine, and it's driven externally. A lot of the water pumps are actually driven by the timing belt inside the engine. And then as we move up, we've got the cylinder head, which is right here, and this is the valve cover. Now if we look on top, we've got this solenoid here and this solenoid here, which are variable valve timing solenoids. So it actually changes the timing, the valve timing, depending on the engine's needs and the way you're driving. And that's what these two things are, variable valve timing. This black thing here, this cover, this is your ignition module, and these are going to be your ignition coils. So each one of these are going to be firing each one of the spark plugs. Underneath this, as we disassemble it, you'll see the spark plugs are down underneath here. You go around to the side, we have the oil filter on this one. These little silver things here, these are called freeze plugs, and they're mostly casting holes for when they make the engine, but after the engine is assembled, they put these freeze plugs in here so that if you don't have the right mixture of antifreeze in the wintertime and the water freezes inside your block, it'll push these out instead of cracking the cylinder block. Down here underneath is your oil pan. This is your dipstick tube, which isn't, it's supposed to be in this little hole right here, which it's not installed properly. This right here is going to be your intake manifold. Intake manifold would go on right here, and these holes right here go into the intake of the engine. We come around to the back side, and we have the thermostat. So the coolant, the antifreeze, which is one of the chapters we're going to be talking about this week. The coolant goes in here. The thermostat's going to be sitting right here. That controls the temperature of the engine. This is going to be your ECT, or your engine coolant temperature sensor. And it's usually always located right next to the thermostat. Then on the back side over here, you can see the other side of the water pump, more freeze plugs. This over here is going to be your exhaust port. So this is where your exhaust manifold would hook up on this side. And then you can see the ignition module from this side here. This is another angle of the variable valve timing solenoid. So that's kind of a quick rundown of this engine. Let's go take a look at the VW engine. Before we move over to the Volkswagen engine, this is considered an inline 4 cylinders. So you've got 4 cylinders, we've got 4 coils, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the pistons are going to be located right there, 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 and there. They're all in a straight line, so that would be an inline 4. And this right here says 16V. That means it's got 16 valves in the cylinder head. So as we get the cylinder head off, you'll be able to see what that looks like. I've got the valve cover off of this engine, and I wanted to kind of go over some of the things here. These two little hubs right here. So this right here is going to be the camshaft. So you've got 2 camshafts. This is dual overhead cam. So we've got one camshaft here, one camshaft here. This one's going to be operating the intake valves. This one's going to be operating the exhaust valve. So this is the intake cam, exhaust cam. These this chain right here, this is the timing chain, and I'm going to show you a better picture of that when I get the front cover off. But these big, they look like kind of cylinder cups or whatever you want to call them. This is your variable valve timing. So this is the mechanism in here that's going to advance the timing on the camshafts depending on how you're driving and different things like that. And if we look at this, the valve cover over here, now if you remember on the walk around, we had the variable valve timing solenoids right here. These are operated electronically, and so those are the solenoids, and they are actually operating, well, actually, let me pull this out so you can see it a little bit. They're operating hydraulically right here, and that's what they're doing is they're channeling hydraulic pressure through these ports here in the valve cover that actually match up to these ports here, which go into the backside of these cams and actually manipulate these mechanisms here to keep or to advance or retard the cam timing. Back here you have some sensors on the valve cover. So there's a sensor here and a sensor here, and these are magnetic sensors. So if we look at the back of these, they're just a permanent magnet right there, and what they're going to be doing is they actually look to see what the camshafts are doing. So those sensors sit really close to these reluctor wheels right here, and you see these grooves in the reluctor wheels. That tells the sensor every time one of these spaces comes up in front of one of those magnetic sensors, it's going to send a signal to the PCM, and the PCM can determine if these cams are advanced, retarded, or right on. And so it can adjust the oil pressure down here based on the sensor reading over here, and can adjust the cams advance or retard depending on how it needs to be adjusted on how you're driving the vehicle. So that's this part of the cylinder head. I'm going to continue on down, and when I get further in, I'll show you some more. Okay, it's time to pull the front cover off from the engine, which is this piece right here. We're going to take that off. In order to do that, I've got to get the harmonic balancer out of the way. And so I've got it set up with a crank or a harmonic balancer puller. Now this is just a set of 3 jaws that grab onto the back side of the puller. You need to be careful if you're using one of these tools, because if you pull too hard, you can actually chip the back of this pulley, and that'd be a bad thing. So you don't want to do that. So if you're using this tool, use caution when you're doing it and tighten it up really slow. Never, ever, ever use an impact wrench when you're doing this. Always use hand tools when you're tightening this up. And so we'll go ahead and pull that off. Get the right socket on here and we'll pull it off. There we go. And it should come off fairly simply like this. Now what I've done is I've loosened the center bolt right here and backed it out a little ways and then put it back in so I had something to pull against. And now you see the pulley is loose, so now I can take this bolt out. So I can just spin the bolt out and the pulley comes off. Maybe. There we go. And it comes off just like that. One of the things you want to look for is make sure you don't lose that little keeper right there. That's called a Woodruff key. It goes in this little slot right here, and sometimes those fall out. You want to make sure that you, this one looks like it's stuck in there pretty good, so don't have to worry about it too much, but make sure that you don't lose that.
So if it falls out, is it going to fall out this way, or is it going to slide out with the pulley?
Sometimes it slides out with the pulley, sometimes it'll fall back inside. So you just want to make sure that it's there. And if you look at this pulley here, somebody else has already chipped it a couple of times by using that pulley a little bit too aggressively. So a lot of times what will happen too, to chip that pulley is, I know a lot of you have probably done this if you've worked on engines around before. If you take some pry bars and you go back in here like this, you can push the pulley off. but you can end up breaking the pulley itself. And the other thing that could be bad about doing that is the, let me get the pulley back off of here. This right here is just cast aluminum, and it breaks really, really easy. And so if you're putting a lot of pressure on this, you can crack it, and then you've got to replace this whole front piece. So you need to be careful when you're pulling these dampeners off. In order to get this front cover off, I've got to take the oil pan off. So I've taken all of the bolts out of the oil pan, and it's ready to come off now. So the oil pan comes off. And inside the engine here, the oil pan come off. This right here is going to be your oil pickup tube. Your oil pump is going to be up here. It's going to be driven by probably the crankshaft or the camshaft, one of the two. And so this right here is going to be your crankshaft. So these pieces right here are the crankshaft. These are your connecting rods that we talked about in one of the other videos. And these are your main journals. So these are your main bearings. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, and then you've got 4 connecting rods that are attached to the piston. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 there. So now that I've got this all off, this all part right here is part of the front cover. So we're going to disassemble that and move forward. Okay, I've got all the bolts off from the front cover, so we're just going to pop the front cover off. I wish they all come off that easy, right? So inside the front cover on this particular engine, this is going to be your oil pump. And remember I said that it was driven by the crankshaft or the camshaft. In this case it's the crankshaft, so you see those little sprockets right down here. They go over the crankshaft, and so as the crankshaft spins, that's what drives the oil pump itself. This is a pressure relief valve on the oil pump. So if the oil pump builds up too much pressure, it blows it off here instead of blowing out the seals in the engine. So that's your front cover. So if we were going to go further into this, we could take these screws out here and get inside of the oil pump. But we're not going to do that on this engine here. What I wanted to do is I wanted to show you the timing covers, or the timing chain. So we've got the timing chain here that goes all the way around, and it goes around the crankshaft, and then you have your exhaust cam and your intake cam. These right here are tensioners. This is the timing chain tensioner. It's a little hydraulic that holds tension, holds the chain really tight on this. Now a timing chain is one that usually doesn't have a maintenance interval. It's there for the life of the engine. If this was a belt, in other words, if it looked just like your serpentine belt on the front of the engine, the belts usually are replaced about every 60 to 100,000 miles depending on the engine. But this one here, you would never have to replace it unless there was a problem with it. And then these are just the guides that guide the chain, and they're made out of plastic, and they seem to last. So,
Is this self-adjusting?
yes, it is. It's a hydraulic adjuster that basically self-adjusts, keep the tension on there. Whenever you replace a timing belt or a chain, some of the things that you always want to replace is the timing chain tensioner. So if this was a timing belt and we were doing a maintenance replacement on it, we would replace the tensioner and any other idler pulleys that may be in there. This one doesn't have any idler pulleys, but there would be pulleys that would be driven by the belt, or if the water pump is driven by the belt, you'd replace that at the same time.